My name is Maya Collins. I am 27 years old, and for most of my life I believed privacy was something you earned by behaving well. I thought that if I stayed polite, stayed responsible, stayed grateful, my parents would eventually treat me like an adult. I did not understand that some people do not reward adulthood, they punish it. I learned that the week I discovered my parents had copies of my house keys, and they were using them to rewrite my life while I was at work. I grew up outside Kansas City in a neighborhood where lawns were trimmed like haircuts, and every porch had the same polite furniture. My parents, Karen and Paul Collins, were admired everywhere we went. My mother remembered birthdays, volunteered at church, and carried emergency snacks for other people's children. My father coached youth baseball and fixed things without being asked. From the outside, we looked like stability. Inside our house, stability had rules. Love came with instructions. Approval came with conditions. Obedience was treated like character, and independence was treated like risk. My parents did not yell much. They did not need to. They used concern like a leash. If I wanted to go to a friend's house, my mother needed the address, the parents' names, the plan for the night, and the plan for the plan. If I wanted to try a new hobby, my father needed to know how it would look on a college application. If I disagreed, I was told I was sensitive, dramatic, or ungrateful. By 15, I had learned the family skill, smiling while swallowing the feeling of being watched. My older brother, Lucas, was proof that leaving was possible. Lucas left for college at 18 and rarely returned. At home, his name became a warning label. When my parents spoke about him, they did it in careful tones, like they were handling something sharp. He was called stubborn. He was called selfish. He was called easily influenced. Nobody asked why he left. I did not ask either, because in our house, questions were treated like challenges. I went to college in state and tried to keep peace. I called home the way my mother wanted, often and reassuring. I shared my schedule. I shared my grades. I shared enough to keep them calm. When I got my first job offer in Seattle after graduation, my parents responded with a version of congratulations that sounded like a warning. Seattle was far. Seattle was expensive. Seattle was full of strangers. My mother asked whether I was running away from my family. My father asked whether I was making decisions based on emotions. I moved anyway, and for the first time my life became quiet in the best way. Seattle gave me space to learn who I was without commentary. I worked in product marketing at a mid-sized tech company. I rented a small apartment in Fremont with good light and a kitchen that barely fit two people. I paid my rent, built my credit, and made routines that belonged to me. My parents reacted as if I had moved into danger, and then locked the door behind me. My mother called daily with gentle questions that always landed on control. Who I spent time with, where I went, whether I was dating anyone serious. My father texted long messages about priorities and stability. They framed it as love. I started to recognize it as management. Then I met Jordan Reyes. Jordan worked as a building inspector for the city, a job that requires patience, detail, and a steady spine. He was not loud, he was not flashy. He did not perform to be liked, questions, and waited for real answers. Being with him felt simple, which is another way of saying it felt safe. He became part of my routine without taking it over. When my parents met him, they praised him with the same warmth they used on strangers. They also tested him about debt, arrests, ambition, and whether he was the type to drift. Jordan answered calmly, then later admitted the questions felt less like curiosity and more like an interview for a role my parents were casting. For 2 years, Jordan and I built a life that made sense. On a rainy Saturday in our apartment, with water tapping the window and the smell of coffee in the air, he proposed. No crowd, no photographer hiding behind a plant, just us. Yes, and I expected my parents to be happy, or at least pretend. They congratulated me and immediately started negotiating my future. My mother suggested a longer engagement so everyone could adjust. My father suggested we consider moving closer to home to start a family the right way. They spoke like my marriage was a meeting and they were senior partners. Jordan and I set boundaries early. We would get married in Seattle, a small garden ceremony with close friends and a few relatives. No huge guest list, no church stage, no performance. My parents did not fight openly. They offered help. They offered to pay for vendors. They offered to handle logistics. The offers were shiny and heavy. Each one came with strings disguised as ribbons. We declined politely. That was the moment the weirdness began. It started with details that could be dismissed. One Monday, I came home and found our doormat rotated so the letters faced inward. The next day, the hallway light outside our door was turned off, even though the building kept it on. Then I found a sticky note on the fridge that I did not remember writing. It said, "Call Mom." It was my handwriting, but not my rhythm. Myself, it was stress. Jordan noticed too. A simple question: who had keys? I had one spare key with my best friend, Kendra. Kendra had lived in Seattle her whole life and treated trust like a contract. She would never enter my home without asking. I had another spare key hidden in my car's glove compartment for emergencies. And months earlier, after a conversation where my mother's voice turned tender, I had given my parents a key for emergencies. My mother had promised she would never use it unless. I believed her, because I wanted to. Then the first planted object appeared. Jordan came home early for lunch and found a pale blue scarf draped over the back of our living room chair, like a casual claim. He texted me a photo. I stared at it at my desk, trying to find the correct sentence that would not trigger panic. I did not own a scarf like that. I called him, and he listened to my answer without suspicion, but with focus, whether anyone could have entered. Him no, then corrected myself. Him about the key my parents had. When I got home that night, the apartment looked normal at first. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry. Then I noticed the bathroom trash. A hotel key sleeve sat on top like someone wanted it to be found immediately. It had the logo of a downtown hotel. In our bedroom, a small velvet jewelry box sat open and empty on the dresser, placed neatly in the center. It was not mine. The objects were not messy. They were staged. Someone had entered our home and planted doubt like a seed. I called my parents, directly whether they had used the emergency key. My mother responded with a pause that lasted half a second too long, like someone searching for a believable emotion. Then came the wounded tone. How could I accuse her? My father's voice hardened into disappointment. I was being ungrateful. Neither answered the question. When people refuse a simple answer, they are protecting something. Jordan did not accuse me. He did something more powerful. He treated it like a problem to solve. He worked around buildings for a living. He knew the difference between accidental mess and deliberate staging. The scarf was placed where it would be seen immediately. The hotel sleeve was on top of the trash, not buried. The velvet box was centered like a prop. Jordan suggested we stop talking to my parents and start documenting. At first, the idea felt dramatic. Then I remembered the rotated doormat and the sticky note in handwriting that was mine, but not mine. We documented everything. We installed 2 small cameras, one aimed at the entryway, one hidden on a bookshelf facing the living room. They were not expensive. They were not complicated, just enough to record the truth in case the truth was needed. It felt surreal to install surveillance in my own home. It also felt like the only sane response to a situation built entirely on doubt. 3 days passed without incident. I started to wonder if we were overreacting. Then the second wave arrived, and it moved beyond objects into reputation. My building manager emailed asking whether everything was okay. She had received a call from someone concerned about my safety. The caller claimed to be close family and insisted Jordan was controlling and volatile. The manager asked whether she should request a wellness check. The tone of the email made my stomach twist because it carried my mother's exact kind of polite urgency. Jordan and I replied together. explaining there was harassment and we had documentation, and asked the manager to forward anything suspicious and never accept changes without verification. That same evening, Jordan noticed my laptop had been moved slightly on my desk. The lid had new smudges, as if someone had opened it. Nothing was missing, but the sense of intrusion was worse than theft. Objects can be replaced. Access cannot. Jordan asked whether my parents might know any of my passwords. I felt embarrassed admitting that years earlier, during college, I had shared a password for a family photo account and never changed it. Jordan's expression tightened. We changed everything that night and enabled two-factor authentication on every account we could. On Wednesday, my mother called and casually asked whether Jordan and I had been fighting. The question was too smooth, like a line delivered on cue. Why she was asking. My mother referenced a message she claimed to have received from someone pretending to be Jordan's sister, warning that Jordan had a temper. Jordan's sister lives in Arizona and would never speak like that. My mother's story formed a loop. Rumor arrives, she delivers it as concern, and I am supposed to absorb it and doubt my own life. Jordan and I began noticing the timing. Each time we set a boundary with my parents, a new problem appeared. When we confirmed our venue deposit, the fake safety call went to the building manager. When we told my parents we were keeping the guest list small, the scarf appeared. When we declined their offer to handle rehearsal dinner plans, anonymous messages started reaching my friends. Something about Jordan, something about me marrying without their control, was triggering a coordinated response. 2 weeks before the wedding, the third wave hit: social isolation. Two of my childhood friends from Kansas City messaged with awkward concern, asking whether I was okay and whether I needed a safe place. They had heard that Jordan was cheating and that I was trapped. The language was familiar. It was my mother's language, the language of caring urgency. Them the truth, them to save any messages they received. One friend apologized, embarrassed, and admitted my mother had called her directly. Another friend hesitated, still half believing. That hurt more than the planted scarf, because it proved my parents could weaponize other people's uncertainty. On Friday afternoon, the cameras captured the truth. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the live feed and felt my vision narrow. My mother was at our door. My father stood beside her, scanning the hallway the way burglars do when they want to look like they belong. My mother unlocked the door with a key. They entered quietly. I watched them on the feed with my hand over my mouth. My mother walked to the living room chair and adjusted the scarf, smoothing it, repositioning it so it faced the entryway. My father moved to the desk and touched my laptop, then opened a folder of mail and flipped through it. My mother went to the bathroom, opened the trash, and placed something inside. Then she walked into the bedroom and opened a dresser drawer where I kept personal papers. She removed a small envelope and tucked it into her purse. My father held up a phone and photographed something on my desk. They were not checking on me. They were staging, collecting, and stealing. I called Jordan immediately. He drove home from a job site. I called the building manager and told her there were unauthorized people in my unit. She called security. My parents left before anyone reached the door, moving with the speed of people who had planned for time constraints. Jordan arrived to an apartment that looked normal because my parents had practiced leaving no visible trace. But the cameras had caught everything. Jordan backed the footage up twice, then a third time. Facts were better than anger. Facts were dangerous to people like my parents. We reviewed the footage frame by frame. My father's phone was visible for a second. It displayed a notes app with a checklist. We could not read it clearly, but the shape of it chilled me. It looked like a plan, not a moment. Jordan paused the video where my mother removed the envelope. The envelope had been sitting in my drawer for months. It contained paperwork for our wedding deposits and a copy of our guest list. My parents were not only planting evidence, they were gathering information to sabotage. I drove to my parents' house alone that night. I needed to face them without giving them the excuse that Jordan was influencing me. My mother opened the door with a smile that arrived too quickly. My father stood behind her, already tense. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner, the smell of a place prepared for judgment. I sat at their kitchen table and placed my phone on the wood, face down. One question: why? My mother began with the language she always used: protection, worry, love. My father began with his version: values, stability, standards. They described Jordan as not right for me because he did not come from our town, did not share our church, and did not show ambition the way my father respected. They described my move to Seattle as a phase. They described my engagement as impulsive. They described themselves as the only people who truly knew what was best for me. There was footage of them entering my apartment and staging evidence. My mother laughed softly like I had said something silly. My father's eyes narrowed. My mother claimed she had only gone in to check on me because she had not heard from me quickly enough. My father claimed he had only been there to keep her safe. They denied the staging, even though the camera showed it clearly. My mother used her oldest weapon, the injured mother voice, complete with tremble and tears. My father used his, disappointment. Neither admitted anything. They tried to pull me back into the familiar script where I apologized for making them upset. In that moment, something in me finally snapped into place. I realized there would never be a conversation that produced remorse. They could watch themselves on video and still claim it meant something else. People who live on control do not confess. They reframe. So I stopped seeking confession and started setting consequence. Then their key access was revoked. Then any attempt to enter my home again would be treated as trespassing. Then any attempt to contact my building manager, my employer, my friends, or my vendors would be documented as harassment. Them they were not invited to my wedding. Them I would explain their absence to anyone who asked with evidence. My mother's face changed. Not sadness, not guilt, anger that I had removed her leverage. My father's face became cold, like he was selecting the next tactic. On my drive back to Seattle, my phone rang 12 times. I did not answer. My mother left voicemails that moved through a predictable progression: confusion, tears, accusation. My father texted one sentence meant to sound like authority: "You will regret this. I saved everything." The next morning, my building manager called. Someone had tried to schedule a maintenance entry for my unit, claiming to be me and saying I would be out of town. The request included a time window that would have left my apartment empty for 3 hours. The manager denied it because we had set a code word. That call confirmed what Lucas had warned me about without knowing he was warning me. My parents were not done. They were adapting. Jordan suggested we involve a lawyer. I resisted at first because legal action against my parents felt impossible. Then I remembered my mother's hand opening my trash and placing something inside, calm as a person arranging flowers. Private handling had been my parents' advantage for decades. Jordan found an attorney recommended by his union. Her name was Celeste Park. Celeste spoke with calm bluntness, and the first thing was that harassment is still harassment even when it comes from family. Me to stop treating it as a misunderstanding and treat it as a pattern. Celeste helped us send a formal cease and desist letter. It named behaviors: unauthorized entry, theft of documents, impersonation attempts, contacting third parties, and dissemination of false statements. It warned that future incidents would trigger police reports and civil action. It requested, in writing, that my parents return all copies of my keys and confirm in writing they had destroyed them. My parents responded the next day, not with compliance, but with performance. My mother wrote about heartbreak. My father wrote about disrespect. Neither confirmed anything. That omission mattered. It signaled intent. We fixed access next. We changed the locks and replaced our building fob. Jordan installed a door sensor that logged every open and close event. We updated our vendor list with passwords. We also removed the spare key from my car and replaced it with a safer plan that did not involve hidden metal. It was not paranoia. It was boundary maintenance. Then the fourth wave hit, and it was the one that nearly worked because it targeted Jordan directly. Jordan's supervisor called him into an office meeting after receiving an anonymous email describing Jordan as unstable and violent. The email included details that sounded intimate, like the layout of our apartment and Jordan's typical work schedule. It also included a photo of the hotel key sleeve in the scarf, presented as proof of infidelity and manipulation. The sender claimed to be a neighbor. Jordan remained calm, asked for the email headers, and forwarded everything to Celeste. Jordan's supervisor, to his credit, asked for evidence beyond anonymous claims and agreed to wait. Still, the fact that my parents had reached his workplace felt like a violation that went beyond cruelty. It was strategic sabotage. Celeste requested the building's entry logs. The building did not track every key use perfectly, but it did track maintenance and fob activity. While we waited, Jordan did something I would not have thought of. He visited the locksmith whose sticker was on our building's lobby bulletin board. Whether anyone had ordered a duplicate key or fob for our unit in the past months. The locksmith hesitated, then admitted someone had come in with a copy of our lease and a driver's license matching my name, requesting an extra key for emergencies. The signature did not match mine. The ID was a fake. The fake ID detail changed the story from family drama to fraud. It meant my parents were willing to commit crimes that left paper trails. Jordan asked for the security camera footage from the locksmith's shop. The locksmith agreed, embarrassed. The footage showed my mother, hair tucked behind her ear the way she does when she wants to look harmless, handing over paperwork with practiced ease. My father stood behind her, scanning the shop like he always scans rooms, ready to intervene if needed. They had not only kept copies of my key, they had actively manufactured new ones. I watched that footage and felt an unfamiliar kind of grief. Not sadness for the relationship I wished I had. Grief for the reality that my parents were willing to impersonate me to maintain access. People do not do that out of love. They do it out of entitlement. Entitlement is the belief that someone else's life belongs to you. That was the day my brother Lucas finally called. Lucas had been silent for months, which had always been his survival strategy. But someone from our hometown had mentioned my parents were telling stories about me. Lucas did not ask for details first, whether my parents had keys. When I confirmed, he went quiet, then told me they had done something similar to him years earlier. Lucas dated a woman in college. When he refused to move back home after graduation, evidence started appearing. Notes on his windshield implying his girlfriend was cheating. Lipstick marks he could not explain. Rumors reaching his friends. Lucas broke up with her, not because he believed it, but because the pressure made him feel like he was living under surveillance. Only later did he realize the timing matched our parents' unannounced visits. He never had proof, only instinct. I had proof. Lucas told me a sentence that stayed with me. Our parents do not lose. They only regroup. Lucas also revealed something else. Our parents were afraid of Jordan for a reason they would never admit out loud. Jordan worked in a world of documentation and compliance. He understood how systems work. My parents could charm neighbors and church friends. They could not charm a timestamp. Jordan represented a future where my life was not negotiable. So they targeted him, because if they broke the relationship, they would regain access to me. With Lucas now involved, the family narrative shifted. He contacted a few relatives and calmly described the unauthorized entry and the fake ID. He did not argue feelings. He described actions. Some relatives ignored him. Some asked for proof. I shared clips with only a few people I trusted. Once people saw my mother unlock my door and my father photograph my desk, the story became harder for my parents to spin. In families that worship appearances, a key in the wrong hand is difficult to explain away. 3 weeks before the wedding, my venue coordinator called to confirm a cancellation request. Someone had called pretending to be me, claiming we needed to cancel due to safety concerns. The coordinator asked for the password we had set. The caller failed and hung up. My hands went cold anyway. My parents were shifting from sabotaging my home to sabotaging my wedding. Celeste advised we file a police report for unauthorized entry and identity impersonation. I hesitated because a part of me still wanted to keep this inside the family, as if quiet suffering would make it less real. Then I remembered my mother's calm hands placing items in my trash, as if my home was a stage and I was a character she could rewrite. Quiet handling had been my parents' advantage for decades. I filed the report. The officer who took it did not look shocked. He looked tired, like he had seen families weaponize access before. Video changed everything. Video replaced stories with facts. After the police report, my parents tried to regain control through something they loved: public performance. My mother sent an email to extended family announcing she was worried about my safety and asking for prayers. My father called my Aunt Marisol and implied Jordan was isolating me. Marisol, unlike many relatives, asked for specifics. When my father offered vague concern instead of facts, again. Then she called me directly. I gave her the simple truth and offered proof. Marisol did not need more than the key footage. She was quiet for a long time, then told me she had suspected our parents used concern as a weapon for years. Marisol's support mattered because it made me realize something. My parents' strongest tool was not the key. It was the assumption that family loyalty requires silence. They expected me to keep their behavior private so they could continue presenting as loving parents publicly. Once I stopped protecting their image, their power began to shrink. The week before the wedding, my mother tried a softer tactic. She appeared at my dress fitting in Seattle, claiming she had flown in as a surprise. She carried flowers and wore her safest smile. The boutique manager, already warned by my code word protocol, asked me privately whether my mother was allowed in. No. The manager turned my mother away. My mother cried in the lobby loud enough for strangers to glance up. She wanted me to feel shame in front of witnesses. I left through the back entrance with my maid of honor and sat in the car shaking, not because my mother was powerful, but because she was willing to manufacture a scene anywhere if it might force my compliance. 2 days later, a welfare check was called to our apartment. An officer knocked and asked whether everything was okay. The call had come from a concerned family member claiming I was being held against my will. Jordan and I stayed calm. We explained the harassment, showed the officer the protective documentation, and provided the police report number. The officer took notes, looked uncomfortable, and advised us to keep documenting. After he left, Jordan locked the door, and I felt my hands start to shake. The idea that my parents could summon law enforcement to my home as a control tool was a new level of intrusion. Jordan reminded me of something important. People who want to help you do not call strangers to punish you. They call you. They listen. They respect your no. My parents were not trying to ensure my safety. They were trying to prove I could not exist outside their control without chaos. Rehearsal dinner arrived 2 nights before the wedding. We kept it small at a private restaurant room. We had a guest list and a check-in plan. My parents were not invited, and security at the restaurant had been briefed. Still, I felt tension in my shoulders as if my body expected a trap. That expectation turned out to be correct. Halfway through dinner, the restaurant manager approached our table with a strained expression. 2 people were in the lobby, insisting they were immediate family and needed to speak with me urgently. The manager described them as calm but firm and said they were claiming a medical emergency. I did not need to ask who. Jordan stepped outside with the manager and security. I remained seated, breathing slowly, refusing to be pulled into the hallway for a private confrontation. My parents loved private confrontations. They controlled those rooms. Jordan returned a few minutes later. My parents had arrived with a third person, our hometown pastor, a man my parents knew I would hesitate to embarrass. They were attempting to turn the lobby into a moral stage. They framed it as an intervention, claiming I was being manipulated and needed spiritual guidance. Security told them they were trespassing and asked them to leave. My parents refused and insisted they had the right as parents. The pastor looked confused, caught between my parents' performance and the obvious reality that they were not welcome. Jordan did not raise his voice. He handed the manager a printed copy of the cease and desist letter and the police report number. The pastor, calmly, that there was documented harassment and unauthorized entry. My parents there would be no private conversation. Them to leave or the police would be called. The pastor asked for an explanation. Jordan offered to show him the video. My mother's face changed. She left the lobby quickly, not crying, not begging, but moving with the sharpness of someone who realized the stage was not safe. Back in the private room, everyone looked at me with the kind of careful silence people use when they do not know what to say. Them, the simplest version. My parents had broken into our apartment using copied keys and had tried to sabotage the wedding. We had evidence. Nobody asked for entertainment. Nobody demanded details. People nodded, shocked and sad. My Aunt Marisol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That small gesture did something enormous. It reminded me I was not alone, and I did not have to perform calm to earn support. The wedding itself was quiet in the way I had always wanted. Seattle sunlight spilled through thin clouds. The air smelled like wet cedar and fresh soil. I walked into a garden venue surrounded by people who were there for us, not for spectacle. My parents were not there, and their absence hurt, but it hurt in a clean way, like removing a splinter. Jordan and I promised each other a life built on truth, not performance. When we walked back down the aisle, nobody looked over their shoulder. The day belonged to us. 2 weeks after the wedding, Celeste filed for a civil protection order. We included the unauthorized entry footage, the fake ID evidence, the venue impersonation attempt, the welfare check call, and the cease and desist correspondence. My parents arrived at court dressed like victims. My mother carried tissues. My father carried a folder. The judge reviewed the evidence and asked direct questions. Did they have permission to enter? Did they impersonate me to obtain keys? Did they contact third parties with allegations? Facts do not bend easily in court. The judge granted the order. No direct contact, no third-party contact, and no approaching my home, workplace, or vendors. It was a boundary written in ink, stronger than guilt. In the months that followed, my parents tested the boundary in small ways. A birthday card arrived with no return address. A neighbor reported a couple lingering in the lobby. Each time Jordan and I documented and passed the information through legal channels, my parents stopped, not out of remorse, out of consequence. Sometimes consequence is the only language control understands. Lucas visited once and sat with Jordan and me on our back patio. He apologized for leaving me alone with our parents for so long. He survived the way he could. We talked about the strange grief of realizing your parents love control more than connection. Lucas admitted he used to fantasize about a conversation that would fix everything. Now he believed the fix was simpler. Stop giving them access. Stop feeding the machine. Build your own life loud enough that their whispers cannot define it. Even after the court order, the emotional aftershocks lingered. I would reach for my keys at the end of a workday and feel my stomach tighten, as if my hand had to prove the metal was still mine. I began noticing how my body anticipated my parents the way people anticipate storms. A sound in the hallway, a shadow through the peephole, a knock from a delivery driver, all of it made my nervous system flinch. Jordan told me that reaction was normal after an intrusion. He reminded me that feeling unsafe does not mean you are unsafe. It means your mind is trying to protect you from repeating a wound. I started therapy 3 weeks after the wedding. Not because I wanted to dissect every childhood moment, but because I wanted tools to live without constant vigilance. The therapist asked me a question that sounded simple and landed hard. When did I first learn that love could be used to control? Images came fast. My mother reading my diary when I was 13, then hugging me and calling it protection. My father checking my phone in high school, then telling me he trusted me but did not trust the world. My parents driving to my college dorm unannounced because I missed 2 calls, then acting hurt when for notice. Each memory carried the same pattern. Boundary crossed, then affection offered, as if affection erased the crossing. Therapy also helped me see how my parents selected their moments carefully. They did not cross boundaries in ways that looked obviously cruel. They crossed them in ways that could be defended as caring. They picked tactics that forced me to look unreasonable if I protested. A spare key for emergencies, a call to a friend out of concern, a welfare check to ensure safety. Then, when I pushed back, they could point to their own behavior and claim it was love. It was only when the pattern escalated into physical intrusion and impersonation that the mask slipped for other people too. One of the most unsettling discoveries came from the envelope my mother took from my dresser. At first, I assumed it was a copy of our vendor contracts and guest list. Later, as we reviewed the footage again, Jordan noticed the envelope had been labeled in my handwriting months earlier. Personal. It contained not only wedding paperwork, but also a sealed copy of my updated will and medical directive, documents Celeste had advised me to prepare once the harassment began. My mother had not known what it was, but she had taken it anyway. When Celeste contacted her formally, the envelope returned in the mail with the seal broken. Nothing was missing, which made it worse. It meant they were reading my private planning, trying to predict the next move. Celeste recommended one more layer of protection: freeze my credit and set alerts on identity-related activity. At first, I laughed at the idea, because the situation already felt extreme. Then I remembered the fake ID used to order keys. If my mother could hand a locksmith a convincing identity packet, she could try other things too. We froze everything. 2 weeks later, an alert arrived. Someone had attempted to open a store credit account under my name at a department store in Bellevue. The request failed because of the freeze. Celeste told me not to speculate, but the timing felt like a message. My parents were angry that access to my home was closed. They were searching for another door. Jordan asked a question I had avoided. Did my parents have copies of any of my documents, like my birth certificate or social security card? I thought of the file cabinet in my childhood home, where my mother kept every paper she ever touched. I thought of how she insisted that it was safer if she held the originals. I thought of the way she smiled when I could always ask her for them. That was control, disguised as organization. Celeste helped me request official replacements and store them in a secure place my parents could not access. That step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had lent out without realizing the interest rate. Another piece of the puzzle came from the building's maintenance contractor. After the incident, the building manager quietly asked her team whether anyone had provided entry help to my parents. A maintenance worker confessed that a woman matching my mother's description had approached him weeks earlier, claiming to be my mother and saying I was overwhelmed and needed family support. Whether he could let her in if I did not answer the door. He refused, but he admitted she had been persistent and had tried to charm him into cooperation. That confession mattered because it showed my parents were running multiple angles at once, searching for any human weakness that could become an access point. Marisol told me something that made my stomach drop. My parents had been calling relatives for months, long before the scarf appeared. They had been planting a storyline about Jordan gradually. They described him as nice but intense, responsible but controlling, steady but suspicious. They did it casually, like gossip, so that if the relationship ever broke, people would feel it made sense. It was preemptive narrative work, like laying down tracks before the train arrived. When the staged evidence appeared, the narrative was already waiting to catch it. That realization changed how I understood the scarf and hotel sleeve. Those items were not the plan. They were tools. The plan was to make doubt feel socially approved. My parents wanted the people around me to react with concern, so I would feel pressure to comply. Isolation is not only physical, it is relational. If enough people around you believe the same lie, the lie begins to feel like a fact you must address. Jordan called it social engineering, the way scammers use group pressure to gain access. Hearing that term made something click. My parents had been running a con, and the target was my autonomy. Jordan's job gave him a particular kind of steadiness in the aftermath. He was used to writing reports that needed to hold up under review. He taught me to describe events in plain language without emotion words that could be dismissed. Unauthorized entry at 2:14 p.m. Video evidence saved. Stolen document returned with seal broken. Impersonation attempt to vendor, password failed. Welfare check called by family member. That style of documentation did something unexpected for my mind. It separated my identity from my parents' accusations. I was not dramatic, I was factual. Facts gave me back my voice. There was one more twist that came from a place I did not expect: the scarf itself. At first, it felt like a meaningless prop. Then Kendra, my best friend, recognized the pattern. It was a scarf sold in a boutique in Kansas City called Blue Finch, a place my mother loved. Kendra remembered it because she had helped my mother pick a similar scarf years earlier. Jordan called the boutique politely, asked whether they could confirm a purchase around the week the scarf appeared. They could not share customer information freely, but when Celeste sent a formal request as part of the ongoing report, the boutique produced a receipt copy. The scarf had been purchased on my father's card. It was a small receipt, but it had enormous weight. It turned suspicion into proof of procurement, not coincidence. My father's involvement mattered because I had spent years believing he was the calmer one, the reasonable one. My mother was the emotional engine. My father was the quiet ballast. The footage and the receipt showed a different truth. My father was not reluctantly following my mother. He was financing the operation and protecting it with his authority. He used his calm voice to make their behavior sound reasonable. He used his silence to imply that he was above conflict. In reality, he was part of the machinery. A month after the wedding, my father attempted a new tactic: reconciliation bait. He emailed Jordan from his personal address with a subject line about clearing the air. The email framed everything as a misunderstanding and suggested a compromise: a longer engagement period, church counseling, and a move back toward Kansas City after a year. Buried in the message was an offer to help with a house down payment, positioned as a gift. Jordan forwarded it to Celeste without replying. I recognized it immediately: a bribe shaped like love. My parents only offered help when it bought access. Jordan and I talked about whether the protection order made reconciliation impossible. The answer was complicated. The order did not prevent change. It prevented contact without accountability. If my parents wanted a relationship, they could respect the boundary and work through appropriate channels. They did not. They wanted control without consequences. Boundaries do not end relationships. They reveal which relationships were built on respect and which were built on access. The hardest part, surprisingly, was explaining it to people who had normal families. Some coworkers responded with disbelief, like the story was too strange to be real. Some friends responded with the reflexive advice people give when they cannot imagine harm coming from parents. Maybe they meant well, maybe they are scared, maybe you should forgive. I stopped arguing and started simplifying. They entered my home without permission. They impersonated me to obtain keys. They attempted to sabotage my wedding. Most people understand those actions without needing emotional translation. If someone still minimized it, I learned to treat that as information too. Not everyone is safe to share with. 6 months later, my mother tried to circumvent the no-contact rule by sending a gift to my workplace. A large bouquet arrived with a note apologizing for misunderstandings and asking for a conversation. The note did not mention unauthorized entry. It did not mention impersonation. It did not mention the keys. It asked me to stop hurting her. That note told me everything about the kind of apology my mother could offer: an apology that makes the harmed person responsible for the harm. Celeste documented it and had the court channel issue a warning. The bouquets stopped. Time did not make what happened feel smaller, but it made it clearer. I began to see how many decisions in my life had been shaped by the fear of my parents' reaction. I used to call that fear respect. Now I recognized it as conditioning. Real respect involves choice. Conditioning involves consequences. My parents had trained me to equate disagreement with abandonment. Breaking that training felt like learning to breathe in a room with open windows. Jordan and I built new routines that honored safety without feeding anxiety. We kept the cameras, but we stopped checking them obsessively. We kept the code words, but we stopped living as if a sabotage attempt was inevitable. We hosted friends in our apartment without scanning the doorway. I placed a new doormat outside our door, one that said welcome in plain letters, and I kept it facing outward. Small things became symbols. When I noticed those symbols, I realized I had begun to reclaim my own home as a place for living, not defending. On our first anniversary, Jordan asked whether I wanted to send a message to my parents, anything at all. I thought about it carefully. I pictured typing a polite update, offering a small bridge. I also pictured the way my mother's hand turned a scarf on a chair to face the door. I pictured my father's phone photographing my desk. I felt no anger. I felt certainty. No message would build a bridge. It would only reopen access. I chose silence. Silence was not punishment. It was protection. Later that night, Jordan and I went back to the restaurant where we held the rehearsal dinner. We sat at a table by the window and ordered dessert. We talked about ordinary things: work stress, weekend plans, which neighbors had adopted a new puppy. Then we talked about something bigger. Jordan told me that the way I held the boundary changed the trajectory of our marriage. It showed him he did not have to compete with my parents for space in my life. It showed me that love does not require surrender. That conversation was quiet, but it was one of the most important endings to the story. If there is a moral to this story, it is not that family is bad or love is impossible. It is that keys are not just metal. Keys are trust. Keys are access. Keys are power. People who respect you do not use access to manipulate you. They do not enter your home to stage evidence, plant doubt, or poison your relationships. They do not call harassment protection. They do not call control concern. When someone uses your own front door as a weapon, the solution is not to argue at the threshold. The solution is to change the locks, document the truth, and let consequences hold the boundary. I used to think becoming an adult meant proving I deserved privacy. Now I know privacy is not a reward. It is a right, and anyone who cannot respect it does not get a key to my life.